Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining today's session on HR budgeting. I decided to do this just to provide support and some sort of insights to HR practitioners so that we can have a broader perspective to HR budgeting. Most large organizations have already rounded up or are rounding up right now. Some are, have done multiple iterations of their budget, and it has gone through many phases back and forth, but it's never too late to learn about HR budgeting and how one can, get the best out of it. So we'll go through it end to end, face to face. Again, as always, I'm aware that there are also people on this call who have a very good knowledge of HR budgeting. So either on the chat box or at some point at the later end of this, when I'm through my slide, please feel free to also share your thoughts, your insights, of course, to be recorded so that people can get a holistic, a full understanding of budgeting. We know in parts, it's what your experience that you are able to understand and you are able to teach. All right, so we'll make it as brief as possible. All things being equal, 1 hour or less or thereabout. We'll look at what budgeting is. Why do we need to budget? Types of budget, HR budget components, methods of HR budget. Also look at steps in preparing a budget and a few other things. We also take questions and answer. And the question and answer for today is specifically around HR budgets only. We won't take any question outside the domain of today's subject area. All right, so there are many definitions and we'll look at a few of them. Okay, so the HR budget refers to the funds. For example, HR allocates to all HR processes within the business empire or enterprise. So that's an example of the definition. The funds allocated to all HR processes within the business enterprise, typically within a time frame, maybe 1 year, half a year, a quarter. Okay, all right. Furthermore, a budget is a financial plan, okay, that outlines the costs associated with running a human resource department. Okay, let's see. HR budget provides an overview of what needs to be done and how much it will cost to accomplish the firm's objective. Okay, somebody also said the budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. I like that. I found that very fascinating. A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. Now, I'd like to add one more definition. All right. And I think that a budget reflects both income and expenditure. For me, I see a budget as how you are going to spend money and also how you are going to make the money that you will spend. I'd like to add that very, very, very quickly. Now, if you have other definitions, you can drop it in the chat box. It doesn't have to be a textbook definition. It can be your own understanding in a sentence, in a phrase, in a short paragraph. Feel free to drop it. I will also read them out as soon as I see them. Are we together? All right. So, why do we need to budget? Miles Monroe, of blessed memory, says that when the purpose of a thing is not known, abuse is inevitable. Even if you don't abuse it, you are going to undervalue it. You will not be able to place the appropriate premium on the thing. And that's why it's important we look at a few things. There are many reasons, just a few things. For example, if you don't have a budget, how would you know when to stop hiring, or when to stop making procurement, or when to stop increasing salaries? Okay, it helps to what? Prevent overhiring. Sometimes some of our CEOs, it's only the budget that is their constraint, because For them to spend above their budget, they may need to go back to the board for extraordinary approval. And you know, when you are going to the board for extraordinary approval, you must provide justification, because you don't want to also show that you didn't plan ahead very well. You don't want to show that you didn't have foresight. Okay, so either that's a circumstance or peculiarity that is beyond anybody's control, or an opportunity that is really compelling, or a challenge that one could not have foreseen and planned for. Again, budgeting is important because it helps to understand staffing needs. One of the things, a budget by definition, in my opinion, is also a planning tool. Now, for many organizations, generally speaking, the first thing they do is to have a strategy session. Whether they call it strategy session or not doesn't matter, but a brainstorming session where they come together as a team, or it may be the management, it may be the board, or the board and the management. Then they say, for the year 2023, or for this period, this is what we need to achieve. And then there will be other sessions that will now say, how do we achieve what we need to achieve? Then you now need to come up with a budget to drive that agenda. For example, do you need more staff? What caliber of staff do you need? What kind of training would you need to provide for on continuous development? And so you will see that budgeting comes in at a point in time as a planning tool, because as you are working on the budget, you are also thinking, all these items you are dropping in your budget, will all of them materialize in January or February or March? So you now have to take into consideration cash flow. You also need to take into consideration the milestones of the event. So it's not just that you say, oh, we'll do all these things in 2023. When in 2023? Sometimes the time you want to do it, you now also need to check, what is our cash flow likely to be in this period? Should we do it earlier or later? Okay, so it helps to understand staffing needs. Now, I said it helps to prevent overhiring. On the flip side, a budget also helps to prevent understaffing. Because really, for those of us who did accounting, you watch out for variations or variance. When you plan, when you develop a budget meticulously, to a large extent, you want to adhere to it. You don't want to overshoot the budget, and you don't want to underutilize the budget. While it may look like, oh, it's a good thing. For example, they gave us $500,000 for training last year. We just spent $350,000. We were very prudent. It depends on who is looking at it. Some other persons may say, no, it means when you budgeted $500,000, you inflated your need. You were not thorough. You were not meticulous. Also, somebody can say, oh, no, you have $500,000 for training and you utilized only $350,000. The remaining $150,000, technically, you have cheated staff or employee. You have denied them exposure to training what is the remaining $150,000. I hope you get that analogy or insight. So it prevents understaffing. It also prevents underutilization of resources, especially when you are trying to adhere to your budget. When you have a competitive budget, it can also help you. It can aid you in attracting top talent, because it means that in the process of developing your budget, you have taken into consideration a lot of parameters, market forces, current realities and trends. Okay, it helps to create a plan for satisfying talent. Don't forget that no matter what you do, for example, there is still the welfare aspect of HR. At the minimum, even if you are just maintaining people's salary, you need a budget to be able to pay that salary. Now, for small businesses, for example, sometimes if they don't plan well, even if you are not increasing your employee salary, you may struggle to pay the current rate. So for you to be able to make provisions, for example, something as small as dispenser water or table water or sachet water at the workplace, it can be challenging if you don't budget for it. Something as simple as toiletries, you need to budget for it. So as you are budgeting for high-end things, you are also budgeting for fundamental, basic things. In other words, when you do your budgeting right, you may be able to reduce employee turnover because you have put a lot of factors into consideration. I decided just to bring out a few HR reasons why you need to budget. I know we know the accounting reasons, but I wanted us to be able to connect budgeting with core HR. There are typically about 2 types of budgets or more, but we'll take 2 in today's session. The first one is workforce budget. Now, what's workforce budget? This is the budget that covers all employees in the organization. It covers compensation, benefit, allowance, and so on and so forth. That's workforce budget or employee budget. The other one is what we call HR department budget. So, you know, HR on its own, HR by itself is like a microcosm, is a small organization, and it needs funds to run our activities. So this is the budget that is what? Designed for HR department only, okay? For the operational aspect of HR. Sometimes it can be a subset of what? The workforce budget. And I'm bringing this out because sometimes, you know, we HR people, we plan for everybody, but we don't plan for ourselves. We will organize team bonding for the organization, team bonding for the different departments in an organization, but you will not allocate team bonding for your own unit or your own team. So you need to know that HR as a department, you too need to have your budget. Of course, it can be part of the whole budget. Now, I want us to look at budget components. Now, I will appreciate if you can also drop your thoughts in the chat box. Of course, there's no way I will provide an exhaustive list, but help us, let us as a team populate the list. Okay, so for example, you can have recruitment, selection, and placement. And this is why sometimes I tell people that just getting other people's templates may not cut it, because we may be constrained to the creativity or to the work process of the organization. If your processes do not align with the process of the organization from which you are borrowing their template, you may undermine your own. Now, I know some organizations that maybe they have a generic, they will say maybe for officers or entry level, we will give you, this hypothetical now, they will say we will give you 5,000 naira monthly call allowance. Now, if you are a recruitment officer in a very busy organization, you will know that that 5,000 naira will be grossly insufficient because you'll be making a lot of phone calls. Okay, you'll be making what? A lot of phone calls. There are costs for example, adverts. You may want to pay, advertise in newspapers, on job platforms. You may want to use LinkedIn. You know, there should be budget for this. Okay, you may also need, for example, recruitment agencies. I know that we HR, we do a lot of things for each other for free, which is okay, which is beautiful. But sometimes when you are trying to hire, especially senior roles, you may need to get headhunters, and these people, these headhunters will be paid for their service. The best they can do is maybe give you some type of sort of discount. Okay. Now, I remember back then, way back then, I went for a particular organization's interview in Abuja, and I came from Lagos. And at the end of the interview, I was shocked they gave me an envelope and in it was money. So I was taken aback. I had to say, I'm sorry, may I know the purpose of this? They say, oh no, that is your transport allowance. In other words, they have like a mileage, depending on where you are coming from. They will give you transport money. So at the minimum, whether they take you for that job or not, they offset your transportation to the interview. I know some people on this call will say, how many people will you give transport? But there are still organizations like that. And for example, that's something you may want to propose or think about. Now, whether you hire that employee or not, for example, I still remember this particular organization till today because they gave me transport money. And I think I got some savings because, you know, when they give you executive transport, and then I decided to economize and use slightly cheaper options. Okay, that's something that may be in your recruitment selection budget. Now, if you don't do it in your organization, you can't have this line item. Okay, cost of transportations for candidates, cost of refreshment during interviews. There are some organizations, I don't want to use the word many because it's relative, but there are organizations that when you go and do assessment or interviews with them, you will eat lunch or something, you will drink. If you do that, you must budget for it. There are also organizations that even at least the panel members, because the panel members may meet multiple candidates. So anytime they interview and the interview will span more than 2 hours or longer, there will be refreshment. You may also need to budget for it. Now, there are associated costs of stationery for interview. So imagine maybe you do assessment. Imagine there is a practical assessment. You need to print paper. People need to write the exam. You need to score it. And if you are automated, people will go online. There are also associated costs of, you know, either using an assessment platform online, or even if you are hosting it by yourself. Now, there is cost of pre-employment medical. Okay, there's cost of when maybe you want to take a candidate, you are sure, you are convinced, and depending on the role, medical is required. There's a cost associated with this. Sometimes you may need to provide accommodation for some candidates. Okay, there are also organizations, for example, that may make provision for data for candidates for virtual interview. Some organizations, if they hire you, and at the point where they hire you, you are resident in a state outside of where the organization is, they may need to pay you some relocation allowance. You may need to budget for that. Okay, it can be endless. Okay, it can be endless. So if you are an organization that maybe you hire foreigners, expatriates, you may need to make provision for the visa. You may need to make provision for that, for flights. Okay, you may need to make provision for accommodation. Okay, and so on and so forth. So the dynamics even changes when you have international staff on your payroll. Okay, so, and by no means is this list exhaustive. Now let's take a look at some components here in the compensation and benefit side. Of course, no brainer. You have to budget for employee salaries. You need to budget for the employer's contribution. Okay. Now, when I put pay here, the budget here, not the employees pay their tax, but you are the one is HR or finance, depending on the organization, that will deduct it and remit. But you know, if you don't consciously budget that you have a range of amounts you pay as payee every month, you won't set the money aside. So that's why I put it here. Okay. And other associated costs, National Housing Fund, NSITF, for example, of course, that cost is fully on the organization. You need to make provision for it. Okay, if you still run gratuity schemes, if you are doing leave allowance, how and when do you do your leave allowance? Some organizations pay leave allowance on the anniversary of each employee. You make a provision for it. Some pay once in a year to all staff at the same time. You need to make provision for it. Do you have overtime in your organization? You need to make a budget. So I remember I used to work in a particular organization, and they realized that the overtime was getting out of hand. They had to review it to say, look, we're overshooting our budget for overtime, and they had to review the criteria and the justification and criteria to be met for anybody to proceed to work extra hours. It's because there was a budget for it. Director's allowance, you may need to budget for outsourcing fee. If you outsource some of your services, you have to pay the outsource fee. There is the actual fee, there is management fee, the group personal accident policy. These are some examples. It's by no means, again, exhaustive. You may also need to budget for legal and compliance costs. You see, nobody enters a new year, for example, and plans that they will breach any policy or they will commit an infraction. But the reality is, you never know when an employee or an ex-employee, for example, will take it to court. They may never take it to court. What if they take it to court? What if you now work in an organization that will tell you that because there is no budget, they won't approve discretionary funding? So you may want to budget an amount. You may never use it. But budgeting for that already does what? Shows to whoever you are working with that you are thinking broadly. You are also thinking risk and risk management. Okay, so you may have, for example, legal fee. Some organizations will have retainership. What other legal liabilities do you think you can have on the job? What legal claims can you have? Okay, you may also budget for professional membership. Okay, regulatory compensations, expatriate insurance. I remember I used to work somewhere way back in the day, and one of my expatriates died. Can you imagine that? We had to fly the body, the corpse, to UK. Of course, I didn't have a budget for that, but that was a huge amount of money. It was a huge amount of money. We had to also be responsible for the burial cost. I remember going to, and funny enough, that was my first time at the British Embassy. They actually invited me over for a meeting to discuss the death of a British citizen. And one of the questions they asked me at the embassy that day was that, oh, do you guys have a bereavement insurance policy? That was my first time back then, this is a long time ago, of hearing that. They say, oh, if you had that policy, they will have been responsible for the coffin, the flights, the this, the that. I said, really? And that opened my eyes, because the premium for the policy relative to the actual cost we incurred is quite small. But of course, we will say, why should we take a bereavement policy? What's the chance that a staff will die? But that risk crystallized. An organization back then paid a lot for that. Okay, all right. Again, we won't look at all the type of components, but I just wanted us to look at a few. Again, feel free to also drop your thoughts, maybe the kind of things you incur cost on in HR, the organization. You can drop it in the chat box so that people who are following this conversation can also learn one or two. There's also associated costs with health and safety, employee accident benefits. Sometimes you need to support the staff or the family of the staff. You may need to have like, how do I call this? Like a benevolent fund of some sort. There are some situations or scenarios that will occur or happen so group life insurance it covers some things that bereavement policy covers, but there are some things bereavement policy covers that is unique from group life insurance. Okay, there are many types of insurance, and it's depending on how you discuss with your brokers. Okay, but there are overlaps between bereavement insurance and group life insurance. But there are areas that bereavement insurance specifically covers that group life insurance does not cover. For example, like buying of coffin, that won't be covered in the group life. But bereavement policy, for example, covers that. Bereavement policy, for example, will cover funeral expenses. That's the cost of the clergy or the imam getting the burial slots, those kind of things. Okay, thank you for asking that. It's good sometimes we share some of these insights. So as I was saying, that you may need to, for example, budget for benevolence, so that you say, hypothetically now, maybe 2 million naira in a year, or you say 500,000 naira in a quarter. Because when you are supporting staff or family of staff at management discretion, that management discretion must be funded from somewhere. It's not the purse of the MD. Okay, there must be an account to debit. So you two as HR should be able to say, look, there will be some support we'll give some staff. We may not be able to put our hand to it today, but let's earmark some amount for it. Okay, there are some scenarios. Let me give you an example. There are certain, for example, many organizations today have HMO, but we are all aware that HMO does not cover everything. HMOs have limits. What if something happens to a staff, maybe on the course of the job, and then the HMO, you hit the upper limit of the HMO? How is the company going to fund the excess? Or maybe it's not an on-the-job experience. Yes, I know you can say, oh, we'll go to NSITF and the like, but don't forget that those money from those sources will not come instantaneously. It will take time to process. So you will first need company money to first of all support the situation, timely intervention, maybe subsequently later you can be claiming your reimbursement. But you also need a budget. So for example, I worked in a place where, for example, I had a 2 million naira evolving medical emergency budget. And it was, put like in an escrow account somewhere and we made that money, the disbursement of that money to be readily available. There was an ATM card with 1 or 2 people who had access to it. Of course, anytime you use it, you come and retire it. Why? When there is a medical emergency, that may not be the best time to start sending an email to the MD, waiting for the approval, waiting for the MD's approval to go to the CFO, from the CFO to the internal accountant. You understand what I mean? Because time, they say, is what is money in medical scenarios, and your speed of intervention may matter. Okay, so you may want to have a special fund for those kind of things. Another thing, in HR, HR has, if you follow the David Ulrich model, the employee champion, advocate, change agent, HR business partner, and we have administrative expert. Okay, so you will have things like stationery. In some organization, HR and admin is together, or HR is doing the admin things. So maybe rents and rates, journals, things like background check that can easily fit also into recruitment, contract costs, okay, fueling, if you handle fleet management, those kind of things. Then, for example, many of us today have one software or the other, or multiple softwares. Some of these softwares have annual support fees. Some of these softwares have annual renewal fees. You have to budget for it. There are certain apps we use, things as simple as, for example, maybe your Microsoft Office. Now, in some organization, you may have a dedicated IT department, which may be managing that side of the budget. In some other organization, it may be an HR cost because these are productivity tools. But just make sure whether it's HR that's handling or not, that those kind of the adequate provision is made. Don't forget that as HR, any lack that will affect the productivity of the employees will come back to haunt you. You will not be able to say, oh no, IT is in charge of Microsoft Office. I don't know if anybody here, you've experienced a situation, maybe the license of your Microsoft Office in your organization expired, and suddenly you could not use PowerPoint or Word. It could be very embarrassing, okay? And it could delay. Imagine maybe your Outlook or something is logged out. Those kind of things. So you need to pay attention to some of these things. So again, just to recap, key components of HR budget: compliances, technology, benefits, welfare and wellness, learning and development, okay, recruitment and onboarding, even strategy planning. About now, Many organizations are, having retreats. About now, many organizations are also doing planning the end of year party, those kind of things. In some organizations, those parties may be domiciled with the corporate affairs division. In some organizations, it may be an HR event. Okay, these things must be planned. All this, thank God, is TGIF stuff, employee recognition and rewards. Okay, all these long service awards, special events, for example, maybe do February 14, International Men's Day, International Women's Day, those kind of maybe Cancer Awareness Day, all those kind of events, they may need to make a provision. So let's make progress. If you have any comment or question, don't hesitate to ask or drop it in the chat box. I'll respond to it, or some of our colleagues on this call will also respond. So there are basically two types of budgets. Basically, there are more, but the two most predominant ones, the first one is called incremental budgeting. Okay, this is typically what many people or many organizations do. If you want to do a budget, for example, for 2023, they will take the 2022 budget and revisit it and say, oh, how much did we budget for salary in 2023? They will just carry it over to 2022. They will carry it over to 2023 and they will say something like, are we planning to increase salary? Yes or no? If yes, by what percentage? Is it 30%? Is it 15%? Is it 50%? They will mark it up. They will ask a question like what percentage of the workforce is going to earn a promotion? Is it 25%? Is it 30%? Okay, but what's the percentage increase? Are we going to do COLA, cost of living adjustment? What percentage are we looking at? 10%, 5%, 15%? And they will now put all these factors and incrementally increase the provision for salary. That's incremental budgeting. Okay, so this is a method using the current budget. A new budget is developed by making adjustment upwards or downwards to each item based on expectations. Okay, all right. So, of course, external training is part of learning and development. Okay, and you also need to budget for that. Okay, now the other type of budgeting, which many organizations are now also trying to adopt, some have already even adopted it, is called zero-based budgeting. Okay, and in this method, every item included in the budget must be justified before inclusion. In other words, just imagine that your organization just came into existence now. It's like a startup or a brand new company, and you now need to come up with a budget. So to speak, there's no historical. So if you are going to buy water, you will justify why you are buying water. The justification cannot be we've always been buying water. Someone can come with the argument that, look, our borehole and our water treatment plant is perfect. NAFDAC has certified the water. So all you need to do is take a glass, take it to the tap, take your water, and you are good. So take out Cascade, take out Ever, take out from the budget. Is that thorough? You can say, oh, we'll buy tissue for the convenience. And someone will say, no, the kind of taps we have in the convenience, in the restaurants, you can use it. People can use water. We don't need tissue. I'm not saying we don't need, I'm just using it as an example. That is how rigorously every line item. You can say, oh, we'll buy 40 reams of paper. Somebody can say, no, in this new year, we are not printing at all. That all correspondence, that let us go completely paperless. Somebody can say, I remember I used to work in an organization Admin was was a unit, but was in the same department, HR and admin. Now, as part of their control measure, they used to track paper usage. Now, and people above a certain threshold, they will now send an email to them to say, we have observed that you have used so quantity of paper. Now, guess one of the persons that used to get such a love message? The lady that was always preparing offer letters. And in that particular organization, the employment contract used to be bulky, like 10 pages. And the lady said, are you saying I shouldn't give offer letters again? Or I should reduce the offer letter content by half? If I'll do that, it's not something I can do unilaterally. We need also legal HR, and we need to agree what information do we want to take out of the offer letter that will not compromise us. Zero-based budgeting. You are starting on a clean slate. Every item will be rigorously, critically reviewed, evaluated. How important is it for the continuation of our business? How necessary is it for the actualization of our goals? So, are we doing party? If you are doing party, what type of party? What magnitude? Can we do love feast? All staff come with your food by yourself and we share like fellowship. Okay, so that's what zero-based budgeting is. Again, many organizations who hitherto used to do incremental budgeting are embracing zero-based budgeting. However, if the organization is still using incremental budgeting, I encourage you as a professional, you use zero-based budgeting, because what it will do for you is that you will already have a thorough justification for every line item. So if the organization is the type that they will call HR, for example, to a budget defense session, when they invite you for the budget defense session, they will be shocked, or maybe not shocked, they will be amazed, impressed at the level of thoroughness you have put to every line item in your organization. It will be very difficult for the budget defense committee or budget review committee, for example, to slash your budget. Again, one of the ways to justify your budget, one of the ways you substantiate your budget is that you tie everything to the strategic business intentions. You tie everything to profit. You tie everything to cost reduction. You tie everything. So you're not doing anything as a fancy. For example, if you are putting Christmas decoration on your budget line, you have to defend it. How will decorating the office for Christmas, how does that affect the bottom line and the top line? You must be able to show us a line of sight. Either you will convince us how it will motivate, make the office ambience more lively, and then you will connect it to increase productivity. And maybe you can tell us that last year we made more money during Christmas and the year before than the other period of the year. Otherwise, I can tell you that Santa Claus is not a shareholder in this company. Can you please cut off all these red lights? I hope you understand what I mean. So anything you are doing, you are not doing anything out of tradition. You are doing it out of a business need, a business requirement. Okay, so there are some softwares that can help with your budgeting. There are many, just mentioning a few. I'm not advertising for any. QuickBooks, like Xero, FreshBooks, Wave Accounting, say 550 Cloud, Zoho, and maybe whatever software you are using today may also help you. Now, let me quickly mention here at this point, and I think this is a key part of this session, of this particular webinar we're having today. Again, let me add, if you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to drop it in the chat box, or when I'm through with this slide, please weigh in and share your thoughts. I'll also be glad to learn. It will be helpful for everybody on this call and everyone who would watch the recording of this session this year or any other time in future. Now, I put this together and I thought about it. Of course, again, it's not exhaustive, But there are drivers of budget. What do I mean by drivers? So let's take light, for example. It is either you are using PHCN or you are using generator, or you are using maybe solar, batteries, inverter, those kind of things. Now, many organizations will probably be using a combination of all these things, depending on how big the organization is. Now, if you are on generator, you are going to be using most likely diesel. If you are using big industrial generator, let's assume you are a manufacturing organization. Now, that item called diesel, how much is it now? We all know that diesel is what? Is a very volatile product, and the prices typically what? Fluctuate. Let me make you laugh. I know one or two people, last year when they were budgeting for 2022, maybe they used like 600 naira. The friend was telling me maybe 600 or 700 was what they budgeted for diesel. And in their budget defense session, people said, no, 600 is outrageous. That kind of a thing. I can't remember the exact amount. Because maybe it was like, they added like 200 naira or 250 naira per liter as markup. They felt, oh no, this is lazy thinking. Guess what? Before the middle of this year, their markup of like 200 or 250 naira per liter was grossly insufficient. The price has gone up to like 500 or 600 naira more. So that tells you that, for example, inflation. So if your budget in 2023, if the line items are exactly the same as the line item in 2022, I can put it to you that the cost of that budget will go up, courtesy of what? Inflation. So you want to be sure that other associated things, I can say these are economic variables or components or factors. So like foreign exchange. So if you do a lot of importation, maybe you do foreign trainings, for example, even if the price or cost of fee of those foreign trainings don't change, but is in dollar, the amount you will spend next year will be more. So let me use an example. Maybe you pay for professional exams for HR people in your organization, maybe SPHRI or SHRM, SCP, those kind of things. Let's assume it's $450, and the price has been stable for a while. The amount you will convert to the dollar in 2021 is different from what you converted in 2020. It will be way different from what you converted in what? 2023. You have to plan for that. So foreign exchange may be a key driver of your budget. Now, the first and primary driver, okay, is your what? Your business strategy. You don't just block your budget from the air. And that's why you don't just collect Oluyemi Adeosun's budget and say, let me just use it for my own. Except again, if your business strategy and Oluyemi Adeosun's organization's business strategy are well aligned. Otherwise, my budget can be completely misaligned. It can even put you in trouble because you'll be focusing on parameters that have no bearing with what you do. The business strategy, which is, there are multiple goals in business strategy. What market share are we aiming for? Okay, what turnover are we aiming for? What market expansion are we aiming for? How many new products or services are we bringing to the table? All these things will determine, for example, the manpower we have today need to be adequate. How many more people would we need? What skill sets? So, for example, maybe we are expanding into tech, then you need software developers. I hope you know that software developers don't come cheap. So, your business strategy is a key driver of your budget. Then your projected growth. What are you thinking about? What are you looking at? If, for example, you are only in Lagos as an organization, but you now want to cover entire Southwest, you want to have presence in each state capital, or you want to be in the 6th geopolitical zone in Nigeria. For example, the rent alone will be significant on your budget. Then, last but not the least, and I need to mention this at this level, is the national budget. When I say national budget, for example, we are in Nigeria, you must look at the budget of the federal government of Nigeria, either the current one or the next one, if it is available. Okay, it may be available, it may not be the final version, but some versions of it may be available. Why would you need it? When you look at the budget of the federal government, it will give you certain insights, certain inclination as to what product, for example, will be banned. Imagine you are into furniture, for example, and they say, oh, importation of certain items will be banned. What will happen to local products or local substitutes? Their prices will go up. It's a no-brainer. So please, at this level, for every of us who has graciously decided to attend today's webinar, when we should be resting, and any of us that will watch it later, when they say Buhari wants to read the budget, don't think about Buhari as a person. You need the information he wants to read. Just listen, because it will provide you certain context. It will provide you certain insights. Okay, you see certain elements that you may say, oh boy, we need to go and revise our budget based on this. For example, if they announce January 1, removal of fuel subsidy, what happens to that component of your budget? You will know that it's going to skyrocket. So I just thought I should include this particular slide and spend a few minutes around here so that we are also very conscious of it. And we don't just do our budget in isolation. Okay. Maybe we'll take one or two things and we look at and we wrap things up. Again, I need to say here, even though, typically I tell people that there's no way you will teach a part of HR that you won't touch base with other parts of HR. So, there's HR analytics in everything we do in HR, including in budgeting. Now, generally, what percentage of your total organizational budget should HR budget be? What percentage of the total organizational budget should your workforce budget be? So I may not be able to give you a universally accepted figure, but some people will say if your employee costs can be within the range, this is an estimated guess now, of maybe 15% to 30%. The lower the percentage of your employee costs to the total overhead, total budget, the better. So there are organizations, for example, if in 2020, their employee cost was 25%, by 2023, they will be aiming to drop it to 20% or 18% or 22%. So you need to be careful. So if you're in an organization that has been in existence for a period of time, part of the trend analysis you want to do is to compare ratio of HR or employee budget for this year versus the last year, and then for the proposed year. So if it is 25%, is it increasing or reducing? In some of these simple ratios, accountants or board members used to say, oh, go and reduce your budget by so amount. In our mind, we just think they arbitrarily pick a figure. No, they were looking at the ratio and they will pick a figure that will take you back to the same ratio or will drop the ratio. If you are also making a difference and you are trying to say, oh, last year our people budget was 23% of total, we have dropped it to 19%. You are already saying, don't touch my budget. Except, of course, we don't have any say in it, or it's beyond our control. We also want to, you can see this picture, this pie chart, this is also hypothetical. So when you do your budget, especially the key areas you want to see, what proportion, what percentage is your staff salary? What percentage, for example, is your training? Some people will say, oh, maybe training cost should be like 10% of employee costs. Some will say, no, 5%. Some will say 20%. Depending on the phase of the organizational life cycle, you say startup, are you in growth? Are you in maturity? Are you approaching decline, or are you approaching revival so that you can scale up and scale out of the looming decline. Those kind of data. So which means just like we are looking at the, what do you call it now, the percentage of your employee budget to total organizational budget on a year-on-year, you will now also look at each cluster, each sector of your budget to say, what was the percentage of training last year of the HR budget and the percentage of training this year, and then what was the proposed percentage of training. So if you are telling employees that, oh, come on guys, we place a premium on development of our employee, but your training budget is reducing. You see that data does not affirm what you are saying. Okay, you may say, oh, not everybody will have visibility to some of these details, but come on, somehow people will get to know. So this is just a random example. You can create anything depending on what works for you. Okay, so you can have different items. Here you have account name, you see regular salary, part-time pay. You can just list all the items in HR. Then FY is financial year. Typically, when you are doing budgets, it's good to show like 2 or 3 years so that we can see a trend. What was the salary in, for example, in 2021? What is it in 2020? 2022. Then what are you proposing in 2023? When you put the pictures like this, we can readily see whether it is increasing, it is stable, or it's declining. And then you list all your items like this. Okay, so you may also want to do, for example, this is year 2022. You may also want to show what was the budget for the year 2022, then what was the actual. Now, what's the difference between actual and budget? A budget is a proposal. Proposed intent of what? Expenditure. But the actual is what we actually utilized. So we budgeted that we will spend 30 million naira on salary, but we spent 33,000. That will be a negative variance. Are we together? So you may also want to show maybe this year actual and variance, last year actual and budgeted and actual, and then what was the variance. You may want to look at your budget efficiency and budget utilization. Okay, because there are organizations, for example, if your budget for last year, if there are certain budget parameters that you underutilized the budget, as a default in the next budget cycle, they will cut it. That's why don't let me mention a certain agency, but we have an idea of what I'm saying. You know, towards the end of the year, they will start doing plenty trainings. Why? They want to utilize the budget, because they will say, if you don't do these trainings next year, the house will cut our money, or the board will cut our money. Don't be like that. When you budget, for example, for training, your training calendar should have a spread. There are certain trainings that should come, even if we are thinking upfront, that we should train people this December so that they can start January on a high. Not that a training that will impact the 2023 strategic intent objective, you will now deploy it in August when more than half of the year has gone. Maybe early January, so that you can begin to get returns on those training. Okay, so I've already alluded to this while discussing the last slide. You can see different components of trainings, and you can see, is it on a decrease? Is it on an increase? Are we maintaining this? You can see here recruitment, learning and development, admin and payroll, shared services, employee relations, total rewards, HR technology, HR analytics, diversity and inclusion. Of course, this is not by any means exhaustive. Just also showing you budgets, because typically budgets are expressed in spreadsheets. You can see here cafeteria plan administration. Okay, you can see life insurance. You can see here profit sharing, and so on and so forth. So you can see what was the initial budget, what was the allocated budget? Okay, what are the incentives? So let's quickly peruse the steps in preparing a budget. I know many of us, all of us are familiar, but let's just run through it. The first step is to establish a what? A baseline budget. This will give you a starting point to work from as you make your budget for the upcoming year. Next, you want to look at your revenue and expenses from the previous year. This will help you to identify any trends that you can use to predict your cost for the upcoming year. For example, if you notice that your training cost has been increasing each year, you can also budget accordingly. Okay. And once you look at the past, it is time to start planning for what? The future. Begin by setting some goals for your HR department. What do you want to achieve in the next year? Once you got some goals, you can start to allocate funds to this specific area. Okay, there's also what we call a budget process. There's the budget formulation when you're putting it together. Then there's the approval process, maybe the management, the board at the unit level. Then there's the budget execution, which is very key. So my people, like, you know, when as chicks, you know how they sit on them. You need to sit on your budget. Finance has a funny thing. If something is not budgeted for, they will easily tell you, HR, there's no budget for that. But let me shock you, even the one that there is budget, they will not be telling you that there's no money. You need to be aggressive and engage, in quote, fight for your allocation. Because don't forget that you are budgeted for engagement programs, initiatives to drive productivity. Once somebody denies you funding, what are they denying you? The consequential outcomes. And if you don't achieve your results, you cannot come and say it is finance that didn't release the money. So you must know how to hold them like the jugular and fight for it. So execution is very key. And there's also budget oversight. So as we wrap up, I intentionally also put this here. You know, how do you fund your HR budget? You know, I wanted to say they, don't let me use that word they. So it is often said that HR is a cost center. They say HR is a cost center, that we are always spending money. Okay, that's a story for another day. Okay, but how do you spend your budget? How do you fund your budget? First and foremost, there should be expected revenue into the organization from either your sales, your production, your services. Now, you need to have a good idea of this expected revenue. Now, I hope you also know that it's not all the revenue that, so to speak, belong to the organization. It's not all the revenue. So you can earn 100 million. Don't be carried away. Of the 100 million, for example, what will be your profit? So if you have 100 million, but maybe 5 million is the profit, then you can only plan on that 5 million. And HR alone cannot take all the 5 million. Don't forget that 5 million, there should be, for example, earnings for the shareholders. You must be able to meet all the obligations of the organization and all the other departments. Why am I saying this? So that you are modest in your thinking. HR should not take a request to the management that they will cut based on funding. Why? We as HR, we are financially literate enough to take the certain baselines into consideration. And we've been able to see that genuinely we can accommodate that budget and we can anticipate the returns on investment on our initiatives so that nobody will cut it down or turn it down exponentially. Okay, so profit. Now I put the word goodwill here. And for those of us who did accounts at whatever level, goodwill is goodwill. Let me put it that way. I know that sounds like tautology. So let me give you an example. So not too long ago, some of our colleagues on HR mentorship group, based on relationship, reached out to me to say, Oluyemi, please, we are doing our end of year strategy. We don't have money. They were very upfront. Say, please, can you go and help us handle 1 or 2 sessions? we also want to show HR is contributing to the business. And I checked my schedule. I was able to carve out some time, and I went there, did like 2 hours with them, and it was very impactful. Although I think the MD now said, that guy, don't let him go empty-handed. You know, they now package some souvenir and handed a little something. That's it. But of course, that was just to like a token, like an appreciation. Now, why am I bringing this up? Never always think about resources only from money. For example, there are many people on this call right now, that I can get you to do 1 or 2 things for me free of charge or at a very reduced rate. Similarly, many people on this call, because I'm just checking through the names, I know many people here personally and directly, they too can get me, and by extension, other things like that. So it's not everything that your budget must require money. Okay, innovation, creativity, goodwill. I say it, you can do a team bonding session that you won't spend money. Let me give you one tiny example. Just imagine all of you gather in the office after work one day, and you pick a good film from Netflix, use your projector and project it. You may not necessarily spend. You didn't go to the cinema. The Netflix you use, one of your team members already subscribed in any way. Now, if you now want to spend a little money, you just buy popcorn. Do you understand what I mean? And that's what I mean by what? Goodwill. Shareholders funds, of course, the investors, people who own the business, as part of the money they put down, you may allocate part of it. For example, if when you start up a company, you will pay salary, whether you have earned income or not. That typically will come from what? Shareholders funds. Then another point I put here is what? Cost savings. And let me borrow a cue from what my friend Victor Adebayo said yesterday. You will remember, no, not yesterday, on Monday. He mentioned that he saved money from HMO and channeled it to training and development. That's cost savings. In other words, if you can be innovative, you can be ingenious, and you are able to, maybe you are supposed to spend 10,000 naira somewhere, you are able to achieve that same effect with 5,000 naira, then you are now able to mobilize that 5,000 naira to something else that is highly productive. That is cost savings. Do you understand? Again, you can do things on credit. So I know people, maybe they have established relationship with vendors. Let me give you an example, maybe with a training firm. Early in the year, you really don't have money, but you know that those trainings, if they are done early in the year, they will impact positively on productivity. You get those training firms, for example, to do it for you on credit, and maybe by second quarter, you pay them off when your liquidity is more abundant. You understand what I mean? That's on credit. So why am I saying this? These things, this conversation we're having, this page and 1 or 2 other pages, you won't read it anywhere. I had to come up with it. HR people, please, they may not put this in our job description, but let me tell you, the first line on your job description is capacity to think. Write it down. The first line on your job. So if anybody asks you that, HR, what do you do? Among all the plenty things you will tell them, the first thing you should say, or don't end your list of job without telling them, I think. We actually think for a living. You must think around how you will meet the need, whether it's from the revenue, from profit, from goodwill, from shareholders, from person. There's something I wanted to put before, but I removed it, but let me mention it. That you can even use, don't do this one, staff resource to get things done. Some staff, they are so engaged, they are so invested that they don't mind using their resource. They will tell you that, oh, my mother owns a lounge. Let's do the team bonding there. You will use the lounge for free, but you will buy food. You just got a discount, leveraging on a staff whose mom has a lounge. Be innovative, okay? Ask for help. You can also get an organizational loan for some of these other things, okay? So it's important that to set a human resource budget, the organization must determine the sources of revenue. This is very fundamental, okay? You need to identify the sources of revenue. So don't just populate your budget item. I challenge you, I encourage you, also have what do you call it now? Like a column, yeah, not row, a column that will say source of fund. And you put for everything, this will be from revenue or profit, this will be from, this will be, have a source. If you can't tie a source of fund to it, you may want to take out that particular line item, okay? So as much as possible, I alluded to this earlier, certain funding early in the year, don't be like the people that in the last quarter of the year, they will not be trying to say, let's quickly utilize our funds. Quickly utilize your fund from January. Of course, utilize those funds on high impact programs, high impact HR initiatives, on learning and development, things that will have instant or near instant consequential impact on the productivity of your employees, of your team, of your organization. If you want to introduce a software that will streamline work, do it very early in the year. Begin conversation now. Don't do the software in August. Because people will say, but we introduced the software last year. What result did we see? They will not remember that it was introduced towards the final quarter of the year. Okay, so as I wrap up my slides, primary goal of HR budgeting is to allocate resources within an organization. It ensures that the organization meets its mission and goals while minimizing ineffective or wasteful activities. Without proper budgeting procedures, employees can lose productivity and morale. Ultimately, it will lead to decrease in productivity and inability of the organization or the team members to produce at its best. Okay, so I hope you've been able to learn one or two things. Please indulge me, I don't typically do this. Just type one or two things that you learned specifically today. So I want to really judge, because I was thinking about it, that everybody knows about budgeting. That's why I wasn't expecting like 40, 50 people will join this call next week. So I'm impressed and I thank you. But again, let me just see, and if you didn't get anything, it's also okay. I'm inspired, I like that. But tell me specifically, I don't want motivation, okay? Tell me exactly, maybe something, a technique, an approach, an insight, or some insight. You can drop it in the chat box. Meanwhile, the session is not over, even though we've done 1 hour, and I was thinking this will be 1 hour. So I would like to throw this. There are two things we are going to do now. One, if you have comments and contribution, please feel free. We are all learners. Something you feel you can add to the little I've said that will help people on this call, please raise your hand and I will quickly enable you to talk. So I first of all want to take comments and contributions, then move to questions. Again, when we get to the question side, which will be anytime from now, when somebody asks the question, anybody on this call can answer it. It doesn't have to be me. I may say one or two things. Okay, you can also type your questions. Okay, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. So you can raise up your hand, maybe for your contributions or your comments, or maybe want to share an idea of how you were able to get your budget approved or something, or an experience around budgeting. That's also very okay. All right, so if nobody, so to speak, is willing to contribute yet, we're also open. Do you want to take a question? If you want to raise, why I'll prefer you raise your hand and speak is that it's easier for people who come and listen to the question online. But I'm currently going through the chat box. My friends, people like Yetunde, the rest on this call, help me go through. Is there any question already? Maybe while I was speaking earlier, okay, any question? All right, so I'll just be reading some random thoughts. Adibanka Bigbe said, I got value, types of budget, and source of revenue. I didn't know that. Thank you so much, Adibanka. Esther Jai says, budgeting directs where your money should go. Very insightful. Thank you so much. Folashade Adeni says, HR budgeting seems like it will work best if the organization has a budgeting habit and an effective accounting or finance department. Exactly. If you have an effective finance department, it will help you greatly. Also, if you have a budgeting habit, it will help greatly. But don't forget that we all start a habit someday, somehow. This year is the year to start that habit if it doesn't exist already in your organization. Folashayo said the first HR role is critical thinking. Thank you. Chichi said, I learned everything about how to do HR budget. Okay. Even when Mr. Oluyemi shares HR budget in the group, I go through it, but honestly, I didn't understand it until now. Yetunde Akintoye says, I learned to always have a source of funding for each budget. Okay, that's insightful. Thank you so much, Yetunde Akintoye. Let me see here. My sister here, Ajoke Omotaro says, thank you, sir. You have indicated some other critical components that we had never captured before. Budgeting around bereavement, we used to assume group life assurance was enough. Okay, Funke Bless said, I never heard about bereavement policy before. Me too, I didn't plan to hear about it until Igbo man died for my organization. Though. Again, I tell people, can you imagine British Embassy invited me? You know, people, they say they want book appointment, and then call me. The thing was funny, but it wasn't funny. May my friends so rest in peace. We're actually sharing office space, so it was also a personal loss for me. Now, Doris Ikogo says, what happens in the case of budget padding? I suspected that somebody will bring it up. You know, I thought about this question. I was saying, this is not National Assembly now. Most people here are in the private sector, and the people, of course, have quite a number of friends in the government sector. You know, I get this, and it actually happens. You know, and what is budget padding? Budget padding may mean intentionally over-inflating or increasing the cost of items. So you know that a biro is 15 naira, but you will intentionally call it 25 naira. That's one type of padding. Let me give another type of budget padding. You actually need 200 biros, but you will say you need 400. So you can have price padding. You can also have quantity padding. Then you can have padding that you will put something that you don't need at all. Are you with me? You know the first one, you needed the biro, you inflated the quantity. Or you needed the biro, you inflated the price. This one, maybe something you don't need at all, like a fictitious item or an irrelevant item. Maybe like a training you don't need, you just increase it. Okay? So it says, what happens in cases of budget padding in some departments, especially the obvious one? What should HR do in this regard? So generally speaking, depending on the organization, HR will also be a member or will be represented in the HR committee or HR budget defense. And what the budget defense does is all members of the defense will evaluate critically. Now, we are not fighting. We are not trying to be malicious. We are not trying to be nice too. Okay, we are not looking for enemies. We are the hallmark of a budget committee is on objectivity. It's an objective-driven process. And what guides this objectivity? What are our organizational core values? What are the strategic imperatives, strategic objectives for the budget year under review? Okay, so if, for example, we say we are currently in Lagos and we want to expand to Southwest Nigeria, we will need more staff. That is a no-brainer. But let's say we are currently in the whole of Nigeria. We now say we want to reduce to only Lagos. That has also told us that we have to lay off staff at some point. So it's objectivity. So if HR should ask critical questions. Don't make it look like Oluyemi, you are a thief. No. Just say, oh, we observe social item is on the budget. Can you tell us the purpose? Or we observe social quantity. What was the quantity that was used last year or 2 years ago? Okay. What are the parameters? And that's why I told you drivers of budget. So if you say, what are the parameters that, you know, drove this item or drove this pricing, by the time they shared it, if, for example, they are trying to be funny or dubious, they will be the one to indirectly report themselves. It won't be apparent that you caught a thief. You understand what I mean? There are ways to just ask those questions unintentionally, even though it's intentional, and they will get to it. So I'm happy that Yetunde Akintoye has decided to speak. So Yetunde, please unmute and it will be a contribution and not a question.
Hello, good evening, sir. Thank you so much for this session. In short, it's a life-saving session. Thank you. So the issue I have is I have two contributions. Not contribution, but I just want to express myself one way or the other. About 2 weeks back or a week ago, I had a brainstorming session with the employees in the office, so that at least I can get to know where everyone needs help, or maybe where they are lacking one thing or the other. And during that session, I had a discussion with the finance person, just to ask that are we really making money this time around? Because my industry, we're into stock exchange. I know this time around, when it's coming towards the end of the year, it's somehow the income is always very low, and because of the current economic status, so it's not really allowing us in that industry generally, not even my firm only, to make enough income. And also, election is approaching, so people are being very careful in the kind of stocks to buy and all that. So I was not asking her, okay, are we making profits and all that? So at least before I even throw out, because whenever I come, like my boss will be like, today, what's the baby party? Like I'm here to ask for money or something. And after this discussion, I went back to the MD just to give him at least a report and a brief of what the meeting entails. And when I about to make mention of, I had a discussion with the finance and all that, it was like I should not bother myself about finance. And at that moment, I just felt, okay, what I didn't pull further, because one thing about him is mode matters. Because so I just feel like, okay, I think that mode at that moment, don't let me pull further, because in my own mind I was like, why shouldn't I ask about the finance? Because I bring paper now I bring any, you be like, you are just spending. You're not bothered about how we make money. No, I'm bothered about how we make money. You're still telling me I should not bother about the finance. At times, to be sincere, this HR work is not for the faint-hearted. To be sincere, it's easy it sounds so easy in the hair, but execution is work. Another thing is, when you talk about padding, okay, it now makes me have a flashback of about last week, when I was making a end of the year budget and doing all that, preparing for the gift for clients and the one for staff. And I remember that when it comes to the oil part, for the oil for the staff, because I know that the price is not, it changes. So I don't want to put a particular price, because I know the next thing will be like, but you are the one that put this price now. So I had an extra of like 1,500 or 1,000 on each, so that at least, and I wrote at the beneath that the price, can actually change due to current market price and all that. So it's also, it's open to change, either to reduction or appreciation and all that. So when you're not talking about, I was like, Shimiti part the budget to buy. Like, So if I was just like, I have a more padded budget though, because I know when I got from my supplier was around, but let me just say 8K, and I made it 9K. The reason, because she said if you can't get it at that moment, she cannot even give us assurance of what will happen tomorrow. So I made it 9K. Okay, no matter how you want to play, at least go 9K directly, and all that, and we can save money aside, or rather pay that exact money. So that for the budget part, you can't worry me like must part the budget, So thank you once again for this session.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll read a few more comments and then maybe take one or two questions, and then we wrap up. Okay. Folashabi Adeniji says the idea of getting discounts from staff goodwill for high impact events is a good one. All staff can have something to contribute. Exactly. Ahmed says, great session. I learned a lot about key drivers of budget, especially effect of inflation and exchange rate on HR budgeting. Funke Bless says, also picked cost of living adjustment. Olatao says, thank you. Your explanation on zero-based budgeting was explicit for startup companies. Okay, Ayodeji Richard says, amazing session, learned a lot, and effectiveness of the little things like budgeting for the office suite, Microsoft Office, and medical emergency projects. Loretta Odoro says, this came handy, working on my budget currently. This training gave me more insight. Thank you so much. Now, one thing I'll say, then I'll take two questions that are already on the group and we'll wrap up. So there's something, and this may address day-to-day concerns so that we don't necessarily need to, legally part in quote. So some organizations allow that maybe you have on your total budget, maybe like a 5% of it for contingency. So let's say your HR budget is 20 million naira. Then what is 5% of 20 million naira? Okay, maybe 500,000 naira. So you will now add 500,000 naira and add that as what? Either contingency or miscellaneous. It can be 10%, it can be 2%. Okay, and why do you have this? Because we are humans and because we work on data. Data speaks to the past, not necessarily to the future. Now, I understand that past typically predicts the future, but it will not always be accurate. So there was a year that we had COVID. The year before COVID, nothing in the year, and I think that was COVID was 2020, right? Okay, if COVID was 2020, so that would be the year before. The year before, nothing pointed us towards COVID. So nobody budgeted for nose mask, sanitizer, that temperature measurement. Of course, almost every organization had to dig deep and come up with extra budgetary funding for that. But beyond that, you can have maybe like a 5% or 10% as contingency that will serve as to cover unforeseen circumstances. So let me quickly take the two questions and we close it. Ayodeji Richard says, how do we streamline our budget in line with costing? Because as HR, we tend to foster more or focus more on cost reduction. Let me tell you something, and I'll be very blunt with you. You see, except you stop doing some things outrightly, cost reduction is becoming increasingly difficult. I'll say that again. Except you cut out some things completely. If you are fueling car before, how do you want to achieve cost reduction on the car? Except you park the car. Fuel will go up, write it down. Diesel will go up. Spare part of the car will go up. There's nothing you can do. But if you now say, all those customers we used to visit, don't visit them again. Let us be doing virtual meetings, Zoom, Skype. If it will not compromise on the outcome of the meeting, then you have saved costs. That person that will have gone from mainland to VI and born 5,000 naira free, you will use data of 500 naira for the same meeting. You can see, I just gave you one example. So you can take transportation, travels. Instead of those travels, can those things be virtual? That is just an idea. You can mirror that across your entire value chain. If you import some things, can you get local substitutes that will not compromise on the quality? Once you move from dollar to naira, you have already saved cost. But much more importantly, as HR, how can you help drive revenue? Can you, for example, organize like an innovation hub, idea hub for all the teams in your organization so that you can drive up your business? See, at some point, all of us want to earn more salary. Not that we want to focus on how do we spend less and less. At the end of the day, our needs find a way of legitimately increasing. Let me take the final question from Tomiwa Ajayi. And very good question. Tomiwa says, budgeting for startup can be peculiar. What do you advise? Okay. First and foremost, startup generally by default use zero-based budgeting. If you are not careful, if you are a novel startup, you may not even have any sister company or any competition to borrow idea from. And I've worked with some startups before, for example, Konga.com, Dueday.com. The ideas come in torrents. So your plan, it's not like you necessarily have a 1 or 2 year plan. Yes, you have that, but in like 1 to 2 weeks, a lot of things are happening that you have to make adjustments. However, depending on the kind of startup, what is the kind of funding that you have? Is it venture capital fund? Is it bank loan? You need to be careful, okay? Because sometimes drivers of startup can be overtly ambitious. You need to be ambitious to be an entrepreneur. You need to be very optimistic and positive, but you also want to have like a reality check. Okay, so don't like go and hire 100 people when you can start with 15 or 20. Before you do things on large scale, first pilot, then scale. That will help you monitor your spending and determine your feasibility effectively. Okay, don't be quick to, for example, go and rent an office space. You can start by leasing or using all these, all these meeting rooms that you can rent. You can co-locate. Don't be in a hurry to glamorize. If you can start from mainland, don't go and start from island, except the nature of business you do really require. I remember back then when I started a small consultancy training firm, I never had the office. I was in a home office. I had another friend who started exactly something similar, went to Ojelegba, hired a 3-bedroom flat, bought a 40 kV generator. I was always listening venues. Till now, I still do it. So you have to be, we've done a training on this. You can watch it on YouTube, on Agile. You have to be lean, okay? All right. So you do things only when it has become extremely necessary to do this. I hope I've been able to provide some insights to help you. And let me just take 1 or 2 more comments, and that is it, so that we will go and rest. Bomb says, I have come to know that you can get all line items in, justified, the benefit the company and backed by data and statistics. Thank you so much, Amen. It's very important. Once you justify line item, it's work, I agree, but justify line item by line item. You will increase your chance of having a near 100% approval. Okay, thank you so much, Tomura Ajayi, for that. On this note, I'd like to thank the people, because some people actually reached out to me that, Oga, come and do a session on this. Thank you for prompting me. Hopefully, I hope I've been able to exceed your expectations. I may do 1 more session before the end of the year. All right. Last, we'll be all right. We're not going to jump breakfast. Please get the much needed rest. See you some other time. I'll share the link tonight on all the groups. All right. Also share with your friends so that they can watch it later. Bye.